So hi there, my fellow Tenno, or Tenno curious if you haven't actually played the game. Parts of this video might not make a whole lot of sense to you. Hey, we're here today to talk about Warframe difficulty, sort of. Um, I'm going to preface by saying that Warframe is not really difficult. Uh, there's a couple of baseline mechanics. You got those, and pretty much any Warframe and any weapon, and you'll be all set to go until you get into what's called endurance content. And uh, with all due respect to the endurance content creators, because they do their thing and they do know how to do it very well, it's basically a different game and doesn't really have any relevance to playing the main game of Warframe and getting rewards from it. Because endurance content is just repetition that increasingly shrinks the available mechanic pool till you eventually get the end point of you're invulnerable when you one hit everything or you're dead. But yeah. So yeah. Biggest problem I see with Warframe difficulty, and often their attempts to add difficulty, is a lack of curation. As will be fairly obvious here if you didn't somehow already know, most of Warframe is randomly generated. The tiles are random, the enemy spawn groups are random, so on and so forth. And consequently, difficulty is subject to a whole lot of randomness. One particular thing is you can see I'm fighting a whole bunch of waves of dudes here. A lot of them aren't, these particular ones. They're not very visually distinct. You probably can only see, I'd imagine if you're not super pausing it, you can probably only tell that I'm fighting Grineer soldiers, an occasional Grineer melee, and the Corpus soldier guys in here. You probably can't see the Hellions and the Bombards. Part of that is because I'm just, mindlessly destroying them with AoE attacks, but as it is. Also, this is the steel path, if you're wondering. But yeah, so yeah. The biggest problem here is if you try and stick an enemy into this mess that's meant to be a challenge and mechanically engaging in any way, one, the player is super overtuned. It's very difficult to threaten the player in the current state of Warframe balance. The other one is if you did throw something... Oh, you're a friend. If you did throw something in this pile that's going to suddenly challenge me, like this guy. This is probably one of the most challenging units in the game. Anyways. He's fine by himself. So he's a fun little mini boss. You either go inside his shields and melee him, or you can jump up and shoot him in the head like this, getting over his shields. The problem comes when there's, because the spawns are all random, the problem comes if there's like 5 or 6 of those guys in one wave. It stops being an interesting mechanical challenge, and for one thing, and just starts scene punishing. And in the conception, mechanically, fighting 5 of those guys, I'm not going to bother with the special tricks to fight 5 of those guys, like rolling inside this guy's ice shield. I'm just going to try and brute force him down with my guns instead. And that's the big death of a lot of mechanics, is they have to make the enemies that have the mechanics a lot tougher. But you can't make them a lot tougher if you're just going to dump them in randomly hit with or another. And I'm not even going to talk about an Xmas alert where they make up the majority of the enemies in that case and things like that. That's the biggest thing. Now, there are meant to be some controls on enemies. And we're going to hop over to the Signum here because I think I've made my point, if you can guess at it by looking at what I'm using, as far as why we're in this mission. And we'll have a little chat there, shall we? Alright, so there are two aspects of Warframe attempting to have difficulty that we'll try and address here. I'll get the harsh and blunt one out of the way first. You can't make difficult combat if you aren't fully understanding of both how your game is played and what is actually dangerous in your game. That has varied with the dev team significantly. I believe the current crop are better than most, but just to take an example, grab a corpus battle group. Here, hold on until it gives me one. Here, I'll have to do it manually. So one thing is a failure to know what is actually difficult. When I did the thing where I reviewed all the deep Archimedia modifiers, I kind of touched on this. Some of them are brutally punishing, some of them are only a problem for highly specific situations and warframes, and others were like, do you even grasp how the game is played, because this means nothing to anyone. So, one good example I've got here, I'm not really having a full grasp on what is a difficult enemy. I'm wondering, do I have another one here? Give me a sec here. It's this one, yeah. Yeah, it's paused. There we go. So yeah, out of these, if you're a Warframe person, let me know in the comments. What in this room is the most dangerous enemy? If you're not a Warframe expert, you might even suspect it's these guys with the giant glowing bubbles. They seem kind of threatening, right? And you'd be correct. That's the most common enemy in this group. They spawn about as regularly as a heavy gunner unit for the other faction. What that bubble does is, if you're standing inside it, and my companion hasn't totally neutered it, it will remove all my buffs. It will prevent me from casting any other powers or buffs. And the bubble itself generally will protect any units inside it from my powers. You can burst it down with guns, and damage powers do mostly also decrease the bubble. So yeah, the thing you might see me doing in the mission where I do this and they lose a bunch of their shield and stuff, that doesn't work on the guys in the bubbles, which is going to be a relatively big problem in some cases. Now, you might think, okay, if that's the uncommon or pseudo-elite mook, what the hell do these other guys do that are rare? These fog and null combos, they put out a one-time pulse. They can recast it every so often, but that does pretty much the same thing as the bubble. But it's a pulse. It's like 1 second or less than a second. Also, each of these guys, you can see there's two of them. There's a null combo and a fog combo. They only affect half of the warframes. That's an interesting decision for one thing, because how are you ever supposed to know? You have to look up a wiki and know that the one with the arch affects your warframe and the one with the circle affects not your warframe, and the idea of trying to target prioritize that in a mission is fucking crazy. But yeah, they're the super like special elite Vega units. They're weaker by half just in general effect to these much more common units, and in general the fact that it's a pulse and not a continuous bubble also makes them very weak. The nullifiers also, these guys you just shoot and kill. Not with that gun, though. These guys, when they make their bubble, and the reason you can't see them currently, these guys, when they make their bubble, they shoot out a little drone, and you're supposed to shoot the drone to kill the bubble, and then that disables their ability to regenerate the bubble, blah, blah, blah. Remember what I mentioned about mechanics don't work when they come into too high a volume? Everyone just shoots through the bubbles to burst them down. They don't shoot out a little drone and then try and shoot the guy, because that's more steps and not viable to do in a mission with actual enemies that are attacking me. This Bursa here, this is like the Corpus super unit that only shows up if you have the alarms go too long or as a mini boss and some mission types. He shoots out a little mine, which makes a much smaller bubble. It's like maybe the distance from here to here. And you can shoot the mine to get rid of it, and it doesn't actually protect the Bursa itself, and generally doesn't protect a whole lot of enemies. And that's its big thing. Other than that, it's just got a fairly decently damaging gun that it shoots at you, and it's got these forward shields. But these forward shields, it can plant them, but they're not super effective if you're actually aiming. And yeah, that's the super unit. So like, these guys are almost like, these are the weakest. This is probably in the middle, and this would be the strongest one. But this is the one that spawns like it's the weakest. This one's in the middle, and this one's the strongest one. There's more a few of that. There's a whole set of enemies called amalgams. They only spawn on one map, and they're supposed to be super scary. I would defy any Warframe player, without looking at the wiki, to tell me what each of these amalgams, I need to scan them, actually do. Like, what is their unique abilities? Because they all have them. I think the fun one is this guy actually raises copies of your Warframe, creates copies of your Warframe, if I remember right. I've never seen one survive long enough that they actually get to do it, but it's a thing. So yeah, two problems with enemy difficulty. One is they get mowed down like candy because players are completely overtuned. They are poorly, if at all, curated in their spawning, so you can't make them tougher, even on a base level, or more challenging, because then they just get stupidly overwhelming when the RNG decides to stack them up. And then the third one is just a general failure. It's like they're brainstormed and thrown at a wall, but they don't actually analyze how they interact with players. So you'll have enemies whose abilities are essentially meaningless, and then you'll have enemies whose abilities are, you know, super mega lethal, with basically no in between. This ancient disruptor is another fun concept of a very common enemy that is incredibly powerful because it gives all the other enemies around it the ability to drain your energy and to resist crowd control attacks. Not overguard, that's a whole nother thing. It doesn't give it to these guys because they're not infested, or possibly because the AI is turned off, but yeah. And also grabs you and drains all your energy. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Common enemies who have had lack of regulation between common and uncommon and elite enemies. A lack of solid design for what these things are actually doing as their unique powers, leading to many of them being meaningless, and the ones that aren't meaningless are weirdly, stupidly overpowered. And then just generally player overtuning. Obviously, the fixes for that, hate to tell you, but player damage needs to be nerfed. And shield gating particularly, because if you're wondering how I take no damage, it's because every time I'm doing this, it's giving me shields back. Shield gating, or at least the universality of shield recharge, also could probably needs to be examined before you try and make the game difficult in any way. And then yeah, just spawning. Like, the suspicion was when they introduced this option to the simulacrum was that these are the same logic that it's using to spawn enemy groups and get in the missions. It's pretty clearly not right, because you saw I couldn't get a nullifier. I can't get a nullifier to show up for the corpus. Ever. Actually, is it always the same group? Might always be the same. It's not always the same group, because I've seen two hollow veins, but... So yeah, they need to reassess multiple enemies' unique abilities and the amount of them they can make present. They need to readjust player damage and survivability if they want these enemies to be a threat before they and then uptune the ones that are supposed to be a threat, but also make it so they can't like do a 5-stack on you at once. And that's pretty much the only way you're going to get difficulty in Warframe without doing like goofy things that feel unfair and nonsensical, like this enemy is invulnerable until you play an emote, perform through the fire and flames on your shaws and successfully do a backflip and then hit it with a melee attack in a combo. Like, yeah, you can add difficulty by doing that sort of thing, but it's not going to really engage anyone, and they're just going to be like, what the fuck is this shit? So yeah, key points. Players way too strong, enemies way too weak. Enemy abilities actually need to like throw it out to players and say, does this seem insane to you? Or does this mean nothing to you? Why does this mean nothing to you? Why do I not care in Elite Deep Archimedia about a thing that says I don't do damage if I'm not moving? Bonus points if you want to answer that in the comments. And when would I care? Which is the when would I care about damage while not moving? Which is, you know, the bonus question there. I'll give you a hint as to why I would care about damage when not moving. But yeah, for the most part, no, you're always moving. I don't fucking care if you nerf my damage when I'm not moving. And then, yeah, figure out the spawn grouping. I shouldn't semi-regularly encounter, like, 3 stacks of nullifiers on top of each other. Hell, you could have your 3 nullifiers, but if their bubbles touch each other, then it disables one of the bubbles. Like, they nullify their own nullification drones or whatever it may be. That sort of thing. And yeah, just look at some of the enemies and try and reassess the priorities. Once you've done all that, you can start making more complex enemies that have like telegraphed attacks and specific counters and things, and it will actually flow into the gameplay a bit more. Trying to do it the other way around, which they keep trying to do, Thrax, for instance, are a good example. You can totally dodge the Thrax lasers. It's this, and then this, if I remember right. No one does it. There's too many Thrax on the field or too much other crap on the shield at a time. And most people just rely on Overguard to stop themselves getting magnet procced to hell and back. And that's the big thing. People will not engage with the mechanics if you set up a system where there's either too much mechanic spam that they can't deal with it, or they're so ridiculously overpowered that they can just ignore it. Anyways, that's the video for now. Keep an eye on the channel. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe and all that. We do got a Neja build video. No, not a Nyx one, despite what you might have thought. Coming up. There's also going to be a video where I'm looking at defense and ways to improve that as well. And I will hopefully catch you in the next one.